Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about how do you stay motivated in a role that you no longer enjoy. I think we've all been here, or at some point we might have periods of time in our career where we're no longer thriving, we're not excited, we're not motivated. I hope this video is going to provide you some insight and just a sense of how to navigate that moment in your life. Take what you need, leave what you don't. But thanks for stopping in and watching the video. So, how do you stay motivated when you no longer enjoy your current role? I'm thinking about a time of when I was in higher ed and I went through this very same kind of scenario where there was a period of time where I felt like I feel like I've done everything possible to kind of maximize my value in this role. And I just feel like maybe I'm hitting a ceiling. And as a result of that, you know, my productivity level might have kind of minimized to the point where I like was doing just enough to satisfy the role. Maybe I like felt numb, or I would get like the Sunday scaries, or um, I would just have moments where I would feel like I didn't, I was losing my care in the role. Not to the point where I would get fired, but just that um, my expectations had dropped. So I had to sit with that. And at the time, being on your cell phone chronically was not a problem for me at that point. Um, so I did spend a lot of time in my thoughts. I did spend a lot of time just sort of getting a sense of, okay, what does this mean? What can I do to maintain this? What can I do to get out of this, rather? Um, and I really had to think about like just acknowledging my reality, right? Okay, I'm in this role. I've been in it for X number of years. I don't really see how I can add more value. What's the next step for me? Is it something externally that I should be considering, or is it something internally I should be focusing on? And I initially went the internal route. I still tried to find different ways that I can add value. So nailing my role down, like I could do it with my hands tied, and blindfolded. So what's the next step? What else could I be doing? What about doing some of the work of my colleagues, meaning volunteering to take on tasks or projects that they may not really have the time for, but it may have fallen in their laps. And maybe they trust me enough from being in the role to know that I could actually do something. So, for instance, I took on a knowledge based project where um, one of the someone on leadership, herself, and like almost like a task force. They got together weekly to kind of continue building on this knowledge base for the website. So I just said, hey, I don't mind sitting in and chiming in. They're asking you questions that are really more related to what I'm doing. So I don't mind kind of stepping in for you. And that's what I did. I started taking on extra tasks because I knew my work well enough to know how much time I could actually allocate to other things outside of my actual role without it impacting the work that my actual workload. So I would take on things like joining the task force. I would also volunteer to be on the interviewing committee because of the type of role that I was in. When it came to hiring people at a certain level, there would have to be an interview committee. It wasn't just like one person. So there would be like a number of people from various departments that would play a part in selecting a candidate, even if it's not from their own department. So I helped out there. Um, I found ways to improve our department's part of the website. Um, and I just kept coming up with these like smaller things that still kind of added value to my department. So what also helped was my, I think it crossed my path somewhere, kind of like a pat on the back folder. So I started paying more attention to like my micro wins meaning anytime, because I largely worked in customer service, but anytime I would get like someone that would praise me or say something positive about me while working, I would make a note of that. If I would, sometimes I would get emails from students or staff or faculty expressing like how much it meant for me to help them. I would collect that. Um, I'd have people leave me sticky notes, or they'd even come back the next day to say thank you. I would make a note of that. So whenever I was kind of feeling like down, I would just kind of go through it, kind of like having a gratitude jar where every day you would write something down that you're grateful for. And then, like for me, at the end of the year, I'd dump it out on my bed and I would read all the things that I said throughout the year that I'm grateful for. Maybe I can make that a separate video, but that's how I managed my like micro wins slash um, pat on the back folder, just collecting all the positive testimonials that people have spoken on behalf of me, or anything good that happened that day or that week. I would make a note of it, and it did help. It was like a small little gym that kind of helped push me through the day. Um, I started like taking my full breaks. Like I used to like eat for a few minutes and then just jump into work. If you're starting to feel kind of like you're losing your motivation, let me just take a step back and say, use your like vacation time, use your personal days, take your full lunch break, um, do those things. Because when you don't do those things, what you're doing is kind of, you're not allowing yourself to rest. You're also not maximizing your compensation. Like it's your time off is built into your compensation package. So by you not actually using those things, you're actually denying yourself predetermined compensation that's built into your job offer. So don't do that. Use the time. Use it. I mean, I've worked with people who would constantly complain about they can't take this time off. They can't take that time off. And it's like they have all the hours because they talk about having all these hours and they wouldn't take it. And it's just like they just had this like lens of just negativity. And it's hard to work, honestly, it's hard to work around people constantly with that lens of negativity. So if you like work in a small department where you're like shoulder to shoulder with someone that has that lens of negativity, that is a tough one. And that can bring you down and put a damper on just your overall work experience or office experience, which is why I do appreciate hybrid and remote work because it allows you to kind of navigate and put an invisible wall around certain personalities that can literally be detrimental to just your overall experience, work experience, office work experience. And that's all the more reason why you should be taking your time off to get away from those personalities every now and then. So don't not take your time off. Use it, and in some cases, use it before you lose it because certain certain workplaces operate that way, where you get a certain amount of PTO hours that can carry over, and once you hit the threshold or over, you lose it at the end of the year. So don't let that happen. Um, so aside from taking your time off, acknowledging your small wins, and the other thing I'll say about acknowledging the small wins is it sounds silly in the moment, like, well, I'm sick of this job. Why am I going to sit here and like, capture these small wins? What you're actually doing is you're building yourself a portfolio where you're now you're crafting your story of the value you bring to your role in any future roles. So you then have something to reference in the event you do decide to externally um, start seeking a new place of employment. So it solves two problems. It gives you that little micro dose of encouragement and motivation, and then it also allows you to prep for um, deciding to move on and being able to kind of craft your story in an interview room. This one just came to me. Stop spending out of work hours complaining about work. All right, let's try this again. I am bright and bushy eyed today. As you can see, I was taking a little bit of a dive recording from my bed. So that's obviously not a good place for me to record anything, especially if I was doing it on a whim. So yeah, stop wasting out of work hours complaining about work. I mean, obviously that does not mean complain about work at work, but what I mean is you are in a role that you don't feel that great about. Don't waste your precious hours talking about it. Now, there is value in being able to have a space where you can vent to like your trusted people, but I feel like there should be a limit to that, and that shouldn't be like a routine thing. I just, after a while, this is something that I struggled with too, where I typically leave work at work, but because of the nature of how my like roommates socialize, we'd come home around the same time. It's kind of like catching up, and the catching up turns into this like just complete like couple of hours or more just venting about all things work related and just kind of like bonding on that. And then after a while, I just felt like, I could be doing other things. You know, I could be complaining about this and not taking action to change it, or I can just simply waste my time complaining about it. And what good does that do long term? So after a while, I did decide to like put a boundary up, like, let's spend only so much time talking about work and catching up. And then let's move on with our lives for the rest of the day. Because we spend all that time chatting, and then what do? You go to sleep, get up, and back to work you go. And there's just so much more to life than just, there's so much more to life than complaining about the thing that you spend the majority of your time at, if it doesn't make you happy. So please just don't try to refrain from spending the other half of your precious time complaining about work. Do something about it. So, and that's what this video is for. This video is to help you figure it out, what needs to happen, whether it's internally or externally. Now, setting personal goals beyond the job. What ended up happening during my moment of like lack of motivation and all of that, and after I kind of exhausted all my resources of adding any more value like on the job internally, I decided to start a hobby, and my hobby was photography. So I ended up, what became a hobby turned into a side business. So then after work, I actually had something to look forward to, because did not no longer, my life no longer revolved around work. And I think that is something that we all need to reflect on. How much of your life is fully focused on the job? What does your life look like outside of the job? Sometimes for some people, that is the necessary change that needs to happen in order to kind of have a better outlook on your day to day. Because when you only focus on the job, you tend to just see the job as the end, as the destination, and it's not. There's more to life than what you bring home, than your paycheck. Is a paycheck necessary? Absolutely. Making money is necessary. It's a part of survival. It needs to happen. I'm pretty sure everyone watching this, the majority of you all are not trust fund babies. So we need to make money, but that doesn't have to be the end all be all. So for me, I started a side business, and my side business brought me a good amount of attention. Obviously, I'm not a celebrity or anything, but I was able to make an extra few thousand a month for several years. And the cool thing about having a side business, at least for me, the way I kind of dealt with it was I was able to kind of like turn it up a notch or turn it down depending on what was needed. I need extra money this season. Let me pitch this particular campaign and bring in business this way. Or, you know what? I know these next couple months are going to be rough because of what's happening at work or what's happening in my personal life. I'm going to wind it down a bit. And throughout that process of just creating and building the business and connecting with other like-minded entrepreneurs, it was like work was secondary. I would go to work, I knew my job, I did my job, but then after that, I had other things to look forward to. I was making, new connections with people, so my social life was improving. So I just want to say that how much of your life is given to the job and the job only, and what can you change to make your life more fulfilling? For me, I realized it was having a lack of fulfillment, and I was able to capture that with starting a side business, which started off as a hobby. Will that be everyone's solution? No, it won't. But it worked for me and I love it. And it doesn't mean that whatever that next step should be, that hobby does not necessarily have to turn into a side business. For me, it was like, okay, people saw my work, they liked it, they wanted to pay me for doing the work. So if I'm exchanging dollars, I need to kind of tighten up my process and like the actual business and all of that. So that's kind of how it sort of evolved. Now let's talk exit strategy, because if you kind of exhausted all those other suggestions and you tried it, maybe it is time for you to find something else. But you're watching this currently in 2025, December of 2025, and if you've been in the same role for 3 or more years, 2 or more years, and you haven't been kind of dipping your toe into the job market, I want you to consider dipping your toe in the job market so you can understand exactly how tough it is this time around. Depending on your industry, depending on your skills and expertise, maybe that's not your reality, but for the majority of people right now across the board, I mean, there's like over 1 million people laid off right now and unemployed. Um, Dip your toe and see what is out there. And oftentimes, because you're currently in a role that you're comfortable with and you've been there for some time, and maybe it appears that it's not going anywhere, you exercising your ability to interview makes you a little bit more confident and maybe even gives you the ability to negotiate in ways you never would have if your back was against the wall and you absolutely desperately needed to find a role. Um, Try it out. And sometimes by dipping your toe into this current tough job market, maybe it'll be enough for you to realize that your current role isn't so bad after all. And you'll find other ways to um, create fulfillment amongst like within yourself. The other part of that is getting into the job market, dipping your toe back into the job market and interviewing and all of that. Sometimes that's actually the motivation for you to keep chugging forward, because you have now determined that your current role is not your destination. It is a point in your journey. And I think everyone, whenever you're feeling down or motivated or just like, um, kind of like say that to yourself. This is not your destination. This is your current place in your journey. This is not where things end for you. That in itself is a reminder that there's more to your life than the role and the role itself. So, but by you, and that comes out when you've actually exercised your ability to interview and look for other roles. That little bit of hope helps you kind of get through your day to day as you're figuring out what's next for you. Sometimes people go back to school if it makes the most sense. Um, so yeah, so work on your resume, redo your cover letter, think about that pat on the back folder that I mentioned earlier, where you're documenting all your wins and how you've added value in your department, across your team. All of that matters. All of that can come together for you to revamp. So I touched on this earlier, but I guess this falls under the protect your energy outside of work. When I mentioned, don't spend so much time talking about work outside of work and venting. You can be using that precious time to do other things. I mentioned how I started a photography business, which was a hobby at first. You can do hobbies. You can focus on your self care. Where have you neglected yourself in this as you're, building your career? Where are the gaps that could be filled outside of work that you've sort of just like pushed aside for the sake of working? Oftentimes I've worked with colleagues that they just seem to be some colleagues that seem to default to negativity. And it's like, from speaking with them, there's so many other areas that they could be focusing on that would bring more value to their lives. And oftentimes it's like hard for them to see it. And I don't have the answer for anyone or everyone aside from what I know about my own life. But if you can reflect and think about, like, where have I neglected myself in the pursuit of a successful career? And how much time can I dedicate on a weekly or daily basis, monthly basis, um, to focus in that on that area in that area? Who haven't I spoken to? What relationships have I kind of lost or is kind of on standby as a result of me pursuing this successful career or just working to make ends meet? So, we're talking about doubling down on hobbies, self care, maintaining relationships to combat work dissatisfaction. It is so crucial to be social or to be pro social, helping people that are in need. We always consider volunteering as a seasonal thing, either a seasonal thing or something to gain credit or something that's mandatory through work. And when I say gain credit, I mean like through school. But if you think about yourself in the moment of performing those acts of service, how did you feel afterwards? I know for me, I've done a variety of different volunteering. I've always felt the same afterwards. I felt this sense of like lightness, um, just like, just kind of like this feeling of really doing good and really like um, feeling like I'm here for something beyond my own selfish needs. And I'm able to put that into practice in a variety of ways through volunteering. Um, Sometimes that's enough. The whole goal is to maintain a strong identity outside of work. That in itself can help reignite your motivation because you're not just leaning on work. You have this full, rounded life that you're giving yourself a chance to experience. And that's what I think it should be about. Give yourself the chance to experience a full life, not just focus on pursuit of success. Because I mean, look at the statistics and think about the people that we know that are famous and that are successful and that have tons of money. They're often miserable, right? They're miserable for a variety of reasons. I think that if we stop chasing the dollar, keep the dollar in mind, but if we don't put our blinders on when it comes to chasing the dollar, we'll be wealthy in a variety of ways outside of just the money. And believe it or not, sometimes that is enough to live a fulfilling life and feel successful. Because what is success if you're not happy? So I mentioned how like I started taking like my full 1 hour breaks, and I worked in an area that was right on the water and had like green space and everything. So in the summers, in the spring, I would literally bring my lunch and I would sit out. I'd bring like a little blanket. I'd sit out, take in the sun, and eat my lunch and look out at the water. And it was the most necessary experience I needed for my line of work because it was a very stressful environment. And when I tell you, it literally, just from that 1 hour of sunbathing and eating and just taking in the water and the waves, it provided so much peace for me to carry on for the second half of my day. Um, and I was kicking myself at the time, thinking, why have I not done this sooner? And I just want to take the time to say, if you are in a situation where you have a great location and you haven't stopped to smell the roses, stop and smell the roses, please. Okay, so the quick recap is reframe what you're currently going through, set personal goals, find micro wins, build an exit strategy, and protect your energy. If you can do one or two or all of these, um, I'm curious to know what your life will look like in the future when you really take the time to extend and enrich your life and living experience. Because your job doesn't define your worth. You do. And you can't leave yourself out of that. If you've ever struggled with staying motivated in a role that you no longer enjoy, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, and actually, I'd love to hear how you navigated it. So thank you for sticking around, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care, like, subscribe, share. Bye.